The United States of America, the land of the free, home of the brave, independent from anyone who's willing to control our government and our people. Along with it shines the American dream, where freedom blossoms with the opportunity for prosperity, success, and an upward progression through hard work. However, for the past 100 years, that dream has remained a dream. This building is supposedly for preservation in the fortune reserves that provide economic stabilization for our great nation's businesses and people. But you're looking at the building that controls all power of our economy and political decisions, with the aim to drain the faith and wealth of the people. A building that aims to suffocate and remove the American dream more and more each day. Why? An entity of closely connected global private banks under the ownership of the famous 8 families: Rothschild, Lazard, Israel Moses Seif Warburg, Lehman, Kuhn Loeb, Goldman Sachs, and Rockefeller have taken the financial and economic grip of this nation since 1913 through forming close partnerships with Congress. How has this happened? Wealthy individual bankers from these families came together in a meeting in 1910 at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island. The meeting was so discreet, the individuals referred to each other using code names. They met together to formulate a plot so sinister it would be an insidious plot to destroy the independence and pride of our nation. The Federal Reserve Act. However, the act was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This act gave these bankers control of the Federal Reserve, effectively operating as the people to come to when the government need money, using the reserve stores, or at worst, counterfeiting our money by printing money out of thin air for the government. They would disguise its private ownership by labeling the system federal. This was handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate relations with members of the 8 families. Through Nelson Aldrich, the bankers were able to create a deal with Woodrow Wilson, a candidate for the presidency, to sign the act in return for campaign support. Thus, through heavy political sponsorship from bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act, by which he made the act into law in 1913. This system set to law was completely consistent with the central banking model that our country sought to escape from when we declared independence. So what power does this act give the bankers? The banking cartel now control interest rates and inflation. It loans money to the government with interest. The banking system has to increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest swell, creates more debt. This is slavery. It is impossible for the government and public to come out of debt. It's a streamlined machine owned by these private banks that's set to deprive the US and foreign governments of wealth for the benefit of the few. It's the greatest theft crime in human history. It's a global concern. The banks of the 8 families have wrapped their tentacles of control across the globe as the sucking grasp of central banks draining the wealth of economies spread across Europe. And it all began with the Rothschild family, otherwise known as the Red Shields, a rich German-based family of bankers. Mayer Amschel Rothschild the man behind the Rothschild empire, learned that loaning money to governments and kings was more profitable than loaning to private individuals. Not only were the loans bigger, but they were secured by the nation's taxes. Mayer Rothschild had 5 sons. He raised and trained them all in the sinister skill of money creation, sending each of his sons out to the major capitals of Europe to open bank offices of the family banking business. Their aim was to use their affluent wealth to create close relationships with politicians and royal families in Europe, financing their wars dating back to the 1800s. On every occasion, a Rothschild financed both sides of each war, creating debt owed to them by the royal families. Nathan Rothschild was the most clever out of the 5 sons. He tricked the English government in 1815, shortly after the Battle of Waterloo against Napoleon's French. Although the English won, Nathan Rothschild gave an early message that England was doomed, forcing the English banks to enter selling frenzy, selling all stocks of worthless English money until stocks plummeted to pennies, allowing the Rothschilds to purchase the Bank of England for nothing. To quote, "I care not who controls a nation's political affairs so long as I control her currency." Mayer Amstel Rothschild. The English money was gone, and since the Rothschilds financed numerous wars, the English government have since been enslaved into using taxpayers' money to pay back their war debt, using the very same central banking system as the Federal Reserve. For you see, whoever controls the volume of money in any country is the absolute of all industry and commerce. James Garfield, 20th President of the United States of America. They are toying with our governments, our companies, our businesses, and our lives. The only thing that gives our money value is how much is within circulation. Therefore, the power to regulate the money supply is also the power to regulate its value, which is also the power to manipulate and control entire economies. Let's look at what's happened now. The Bank of England, Royal Bank of Scotland, HSBC, Lloyds Bank TSB, Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, UBS, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, Westdeutsche Landesbank, Germany, Société Générale, France, Mitsubishi UFJ, Bank of Tokyo, Norinchukin, Japan, the Royal Bank of Canada, Rabobank, Netherlands, form the heart of this interconnected banking cartel. The 8 families and their interconnected web of banking control is responsible for the global economic crisis of 2007, with the build-up of an unsustainable system that is at the end of its time. Banks gambled the money from your mortgages that stock markets and real estate operations were going to go up. As we paid mortgages to our lenders, they now sold your money to investment banks, i.e. Goldman Sachs, around the world. And within each investment bank, they would combine thousands of loans to create collateralized debt obligations, which was rated by their hired rating agencies, i.e. Fitch Group. However, they failed to identify too many risky loans from poor individuals within the mix of mortgages, people who were unable to pay their lenders back. We as a people were given false hope that we could live bigger, live the American dream through borrowing more, as lenders didn't care whether you could repay. Investment banks did not care either, as the more collateralized debt obligations they sold, the higher their profits. Everyone down the system received a commission from your money, to the point where we couldn't borrow any more, as the debt increased too much for investment banks and the system. It was a ticking time bomb from the start. As banks gave out larger loans that could not be paid by individuals, the banks began seizing houses and cars that we all bought using the money from these banks to cover the debt. Each bank collected gradually to the point where the debt became too much using this system. Then the bubble burst. Banks turned to the governments all around the world and pleaded for the governments to bail them out. The fact that their political power and ability to buy politicians is so great, then the governments then began bankrupting themselves in order to save these banks using taxpayers' money from you, the people, giving $1 trillion to the various Wall Street banks. The bank bailouts were a diversionary tactic, because when $800 billion was ordered to be given out to the banks, $15 trillion given out to people and places where nobody knows by the Federal Reserve Bank at the same time. The Federal Reserve has no governmental audit, and our government, you or anybody in power, are aware on the specific number of US currencies printed. They simply print out our money from thin air. The bailout was far bigger than the Federal Reserve, public or even members of the US Congress knew at the time. From the start of the financial crisis in 2007 through March of 2009, the Federal Reserve loaned guaranteed banks $7.7 trillion, which is 11 times the $700 to $800 billion in aid provided by taxpayers. On just one day, December the 5th, 2008, American banks borrowed $1.2 trillion from the Federal Reserve. There are estimations that the banks made a $13 billion profit on the money they borrowed, virtually free from the Federal Reserve, giving individual bankers around the world bonuses, trillions of dollars of which went out of the taxpayers' pockets. Your money that you will never get back. All because of the banking system that is there to help support the American dream of the public, but instead robbed you of it. How did we not know this before? Oversaturation of entertainments, mass media, TV shows, amusement parks, drugs and alcohol are tools to distract us with what's actually happening behind closed doors, keeping our attention off the underlying entity that is the banking cartel. So you don't get in the way of important people by doing too much thinking. We need to wake up and understand that people are guiding our lives and we don't even know it. People who intend to lock our attention on fantasies and ideology from commercial television are distracting us from reality and the truth behind the Federal Reserve and the power of global banks. We are imprisoned with lies and distractions from what is real. The people, the bankers, the people in power are guilty of treason, violating Article 3, Section 3 of the US Constitution, betraying our government by overthrowing it. You don't have to run a nation on debt. You don't have to have a national debt. It's the most important responsibility and power of a nation to create its own money for the public's interest. It is well that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford. Together we can make America the land of the free. Together we can make this planet free once more. Greed has poisoned the souls of bankers behind the Federal Reserve. They think too much of themselves as individuals and feel too little for the people. However, The power they took from the people will return to the people. Together we can make America the land of the free. Together we can make this planet free once more, and the truth shall set you free.